Hi there, 2D Design. We are going to start to talk about color theory here. We worked through our achromatic studies with our ivory black and titanium white, but we are going to start to figure out how to work with chroma, hue and still value. So we'll get to this. In the Canvas reading, there's going to be some sections on theory, histories, vocabulary, and mixing exercises. So if you could read through the stuff that's on Canvas, I just have it printed here, but it'll all be in the reading. There's some links that can take you to some other places that you can learn some more. And then there's a video that follows along with this and a PowerPoint presentation that I walk you through to help understand it. So that you can watch first, and then this section is going to be about the color mixing. There's a little quiz, but the quiz mimics this almost to a T. And it's just so not to be graded, but just so that you can help kind of work through and use this as a reminder of some of the vocabulary. But we're going to start with a pretty basic color wheel, and then in the next video we'll get into some mixing exercises. So if we were in the face-to-face class, I would have printed these on a cardstock for you. If you want to do this on your mixed media board, you can, or you can probably even just print this and do it on regular paper too. Okay, so as discussed in the previous video about the histories of color theory, we talked about this color wheel by Johannes Itten, the painter's wheel. Your paint kit came with a little color wheel, and this is a really lovely little piece of equipment here. It starts on this side talking about the value scale, the grayscale that we've been using all along. It's got some little worksheets that you can fill out on the back. But what you have here is just some different ideas about primaries, secondaries, intermediates, tints, tones, and shades, warms and cools, different color harmonies, which are complementary, triadic, split complement, and so on. And so we can break this all down, both in the video you just watched and when we start doing these mixing exercises. So this is a nice little tool. So what we want to do is we want to figure out how to make this wheel. So, and mostly so that we can start to learn about our paint. So what I want us to do is we're going to start, I have a piece of my wet palette paper here. Some old paint kind of bleeding in there, but that's okay. I'm going to start with a yellow up at the top, maybe the size of like a small Hershey's Kiss. And then I'm going to move over to a blue over here, same size, and a red over here. And we're not going to use any black or white right now, or gray. And when we mix those in later, that's called tints, tones, and shades, but we'll get to that. So what you've just done here is we've started to create a wheel. You have the yellow, the red, and the blue, which are your primaries. So this painter's wheel, that's what you have here. You have in the middle, oops, that doesn't work, the yellow, the red, the blue, and then you do the primaries together to equal the secondary, and it says up here 1 + 1 = 2, so a primary plus a primary equals a secondary, so primary plus primary, 1 + 1 = 2, yellow plus blue together makes green, blue and red make violet, and yellow and red make orange. Oops, sorry, this is a 2. Then you take these and follow the point out. So the triangle points to here, you have a violet. This triangle points to here, you have a red, orange, yellow, green, blue. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. And then it says 1 plus 2 equals 3. So a primary plus a secondary equals your tertiary. So you just put the primary before the secondary. So you have a yellow, green, blue, green, blue, violet, red, violet, red, orange, yellow, orange. So again, the primary before the secondary. And that is the whole color wheel. So why this is important is that this is like the acronym that we learned when we were in kindergarten, Roy G. Biv, for the rainbow, the light spectrum wrapped in a circle. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Indigo sits somewhere over here, and it's just not in our visible spectrum, so we're not going to concern ourselves with that, but it's somewhere in this space. Okay, so we're going to use any of the brushes that you want, but I'm just going to use a smaller synthetic. And I'm going to start just by painting the primaries before I start mixing. What's fun, because I have this Sharpie under here, is that you can tell which colors are transparent and to what degree, and which ones are opaque. When you have a transparent color, it can be more challenging to make the streaks go away, and they can be kind of frustrating. But you can also use a transparent color for something called a glaze, and that's where, like, let's say you made a full black and white painting, we would call that a grisaille or an underpainting, and that then dries, and then you can paint these transparent colors over them and turn it into a color picture. So that's a glaze. So I'm gonna wash my brush pretty good in between. I'm gonna go to my primary red. This is a Hansa Yellow Pale. So it's like a cooler yellow. This is a like a cool, kind of more violet-y red. And I will talk about in another video what happens when you have different kinds of reds and yellows or blues, that all of the colors kind of tilt one way, I should say, and what that means for mixing. But I'll do that in another video. If you haven't started painting along with me, this might be a good way to do this exercise, is just to get this out and play along in the video. Okay, and I'll go to the blue. This we have a phthalo blue, and it says it's a green shade, so it's tilting this way instead of this way. Again, it doesn't matter so much now, it matters more when we start to mix them. And you can see the opacity of the blue is more intense than the opacity of the yellow, because I can't see that Sharpie under there anymore. Okay, so now is the fun part, and we get to start to mix. We're gonna mix higher chroma bright colors right now, but we're gonna talk about how to desaturate them and how to make them rich and look like the colors of the world in our next video. Okay, so our set that I had you guys get is a color theory set, meaning that we only have the primaries. So I am gonna take a palette knife and I'm gonna try and mix my secondaries. And I'm gonna try and lay my palette out so that all of my mixing happens out here to build the secondaries. And then when I get into complex mixing, I can happen in the middle. But I wanna follow the wheel. So I wanna try and put my orange here, my green here, my violet here, and so forth. So let's start with the orange. The key here is that you never want to start with your darker color first, and that's a scale issue. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to start with my light. Try not to contaminate my red. So I have a big hunk of the light value yellow, and then I'm just going to take a little bit of my red, and you'll see how far it goes. If this was red first, I would have to use 6 times as much of the light value yellow to turn it, and I would end up with this huge pot of paint that would be too much. So let's see. The tinting strength is what you call that red, and it is intense. Oh, that's pretty. So can you imagine if I started with that huge hunk of red, I would have been in a lot of trouble because I would have needed way more yellow to make it shift. So I'm going to lighten it up a little and see. Yeah, there we go. That feels like a kind of middle yellow and middle orange. The idea here is that we still want to get a yellow orange and a red orange. So I'm going to take this paint and kind of squish it all close together. And I only need enough just to paint these. So I'm going to take a little bit of this for here and a little bit of this for here, not as much on this side, because I want to grab quite a bit of yellow and make a yellow orange. And so these tertiary colors, these third ones, are going to be even more complex as you go. So I take a little more of the red. And now I have a red orange. Those are pretty. So imagine when we start adding tints, tones, and shades, and we start pulling them lighter or darker and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to paint these real quick. So here's my orange. Still pretty transparent. You can see here where the brush strokes are a little more brushy because it's so transparent, so it's a little more challenging to work with. If you want that opacity to change, you can add a little bit of a tint, which is white, and it makes it a little more pastel-y, but it also makes it more opaque. Okay. Oops, there's a little blue in there. That's not good. I'm going to switch to my red orange. So painting a color wheel like this is not necessarily that what is happening on the actual surface that's important. What's more important is that you're understanding how your paints are reacting, so that when you go to paint your designs, you have a better feel for how they're going to work. And what's nice too is that you can save this palette and use this for your color design. You may not though, you may start from scratch once you have a better idea of what colors you want to use. Okay, yellow, orange. Now we're going to switch to doing the green. So again, don't do the blue first, do the yellow first. And a tiny bit of blue. I think the tinting strength of this blue is going to be really aggressive, so let's see. Oh yes, look at that. Oof, that's pretty. These paints that we have are synthetic colors. They don't sound natural or from the earth like cadmium or cobalt. They sound fake, like saccharin. So phthalo, what that might say in another brand would be phthalocene. So it sounds like saccharin, fake sugar. Or the red one, which I hardly know how to pronounce. Yeah, I don't even know how to pronounce that, so I'm not going to. But some of them might sound more like a cadmium, and that sounds more natural. Those colors are going to be a little more muted, and then these types of colors are going to be like this jewel kind of tone that we have. So just a little bit of the green there, a little bit of the blue. Oof, that was a lot. So that's a pretty color though. And then more yellow here. If your water gets a little too out of control, you can dump it out and clean it. So we'll do our green. So this one should be a little more opaque because it has the blue in it, but it might not be as opaque because of the yellow. Yep. So also because these colors are fake or man-made, like fake sugar, and not from the earth, they're very transparent. That also is what creates that kind of jeweled quality, but really pretty. Yellow green. And then the blue green. Notice I'm not really washing my brush in between because it's all the same family of color. You could, but you don't necessarily need to. Oh, that blue green's lovely. And every time you get different paint, it's a good idea to do this exercise because then you can see what that kind of paint does. Because every brand, every color is going to be a little different. Okay, then we'll move on to the violets. So the blue has got a higher tinting strength and is darker than the red. So we're going to start with the red. A little bit of blue, a little goes a long way, that much. So this is a really pretty red that's already leaning violet, and so we had a really great run with our violet. Like that turned out really super pretty. But I'll show you in another video what happens if our red is warm. So I'm gonna call this a cool red. But if we have a red that leans more towards an orangey, when you mix those together, an orange, red, and a blue, they're opposite on the color wheel. They cancel each other out and they make mud. They don't make this real pretty kind of violet. Oops, I don't want that much there. Take a lot of that out of there. Water there. Okay, a little blue for our blue violet. Oh yeah, it's lovely. They're really dark on the palette, but you can see underneath what they look like. And then when they dry, they'll dry a little darker. Grab a little bit of red. I'm actually gonna grab a lot of red. I have a lot of water from my palette running down here. Okay, now I'll paint those in. Our violet. This should be a little more opaque, a little darker in value. Okay, hopefully you were able to paint along and this didn't take too long, but that you have a really good understanding of what this particular kind of paint does. And I know all of you aren't going to go on to be painters necessarily, but all of this theory still applies if you're using Copic markers or Prismacolor markers, or doing something in Procreate on your tablet or in Photoshop or Illustrator. Like I discussed in the color theory discussion, it's called additive when you're using light, and negative or subtractive when you're using pigment, but it's still all kind of is the same theory. And you can, when you look at the end product, you can say, okay, I understand how the colors work together and how they have this arrangement based on the rainbow, and what then you can do to affect your viewer based on your color choices, which we'll talk about more in the next section, and that I talked about already with the PowerPoint. Okay, so we'll come back again in a little bit, save all of this, and then we'll work on our next, we'll work on some of these kind of mixing documents. Okay, we'll see you in a little bit.